So I think with these videos, I've been trying way too hard to be like polished. Today we're embracing chaos. So if that's your vibe, buckle up. We're gonna get into it. Today I am going to be doing the second part of preparing some of my homemade hot sauces. Full disclosure, I did try to film a video about actually starting these ferments. My phone died halfway through the recording and I did not realize.
Thanks a lot, you idiot.
So that's why we don't have that footage, but we do have this. So right now we have 6 different hot sauces here in front of me. So this is one that I made with some corn and ancho chilies, peach and Fresno. This is actually inspired by a mocktail that I had in Mexico City. So this is gonna be a guava and hibiscus and a little bit of habanero. This guy is a strawberry chipotle. This one is kimchi. We'll just be blending this up. And then this last one over here, I actually found a recipe online for this one. This is gonna be a mole inspired hot sauce. I actually took some mole spices, so like coffee beans, cocoa nibs, thyme, anise, that kind of thing. Boiled it down in the brine before putting it into the fermentation vessel and hoped that that would kind of flavor everything in there. And then these are some honey fermented dates just to kind of mellow out the whole thing. Before I get into actually preparing these, so there are 2 kind of main ways that you can ferment your hot sauce. Brine fermentation versus mash fermentation. Brine is exactly what it sounds like. You take your whole veggies, whole fruit, put it into a fermentation vessel. You make a brine. Usually I use a 4% brine. There are brine calculators online that you basically take the amount of water that you're putting into the vessel and you can calculate exactly how many milligrams of salt that you need to add in order to get a certain percentage of brine. You're gonna basically put it in with a fermentation weight on top to keep all the veggies below the surface of the brine. We are trying to make an environment where the lactic bacteria that lives naturally like on the surface of the peppers and the other things that you've added, they can thrive where all the other bad bacteria cannot. And then you're basically done when the mixture hits a low enough pH that it's considered shelf stable. I normally clock in at around 3.3 pH below 4.0 and you're good to go. Brine is really good if you have like non-juicy things. And when I say juicy things, I want you to think of like cucumbers that have a lot of natural water in them. Berries, things like that. Brine fermentation is great for things that don't have a lot of juice on their own. Mash fermentation is gonna rely on the natural juice in whatever you're fermenting, making that brine. Because remember, salt is gonna pull moisture out of whatever you have in this vessel. You are basically combining all of the things together, processing it in a food processor beforehand, and then adding salt for the weight of all of the fruit and veggies that you have in here. This is really great because you get more yield. You can fit more stuff in a single fermentation vessel because you're blending it up. In terms of length of the fermentation, I have let all of these sit for 3 weeks. This could hypothetically finish in as quick as 7 days. I like to leave it a little bit longer because as the things sit, flavors tend to mellow out and combine a little bit more. Aging does a lot of good. So yeah, I think I've talked myself to death here, but in terms of things that you're gonna need, first things first, I'm gonna have a food processor. You're also gonna need some sort of a mesh strainer. This is gonna be to separate the sauce from like the pulp that is left over. Some sort of a bowl, and then I have a big ass 30 pack of these bottles here. I do 3 ounces. You can very easily find these with like a local packaging supplier. These are called Woozy bottles. And then you need some sort of a food safe sanitizer. So first things first, we need to sanitize everything. Anything that's gonna touch the sauce needs to be sanitized first, just so you don't contaminate it. I use this Star San here and I've already kind of prepared a solution of it using the instructions on the bottle. All of our stuff is sanitized, dried, and we are good to proceed. I'm gonna take this brine ferment, crack her open. All right, she smells like mole. So immediately off the bat, showing you the top of this. So you can see it's bubbling. That's great news. That means the bacteria is doing its thing. You can also see that there aren't any floating veggies, fruit, nothing like that. Nothing is exposed to the air at the top. And there are no obvious signs of yeast development, mold development. The top of this looks clean. So first things first, I'm just gonna take out the fermentation weight. I also put a sheet of parchment paper at the top just because my vessel is wider than the weight. And so things can still bubble up around the fermentation weight. This is just kind of a wider barrier to keep everything down below the surface of the brine. We are going to dump this. All right, and then as this comes out, notice that I'm leaving the brine in this container. We're gonna use that. And then this one is also what I had made the dates for. I don't wanna add too much of this because I don't wanna throw it in the too sweet direction. So I'm thinking I'll probably add like 5. So we will start with that, knowing that we can add more if we need to. Nice, doesn't smell off or anything like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, you don't want to add too much brine. I'm going to start by adding maybe about a 1/4 cup or so. That was probably a little bit more than that. And then what I always do is I add maybe like a 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum. Xanthan gum is a thickener. If this sits for a while in your fridge, it's gonna make it so that it doesn't separate. I usually end up adding anywhere from a 1/4 to a 1/2 cup of the brine back, and then I usually add about a 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum. I'll add in my xanthan gum. And then basically I'm gonna throw the lid on this and we're gonna let it go for about 60 to 90 seconds. We wanna give it enough time for everything to kind of come together. In the meantime, I'm also going to put this into a mason jar and throw it in my fridge. This brine will be great if you want to like marinate chicken before frying it or something like that. You can basically sub this in anywhere in a recipe that you would throw pickle juice, especially with this one because the brine has so much flavor infused into it with the mole seasonings. I think it'll be really interesting to use it elsewhere, so I'm not going to waste it. We finished our first blend, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed straining this. Keeping in mind the fact that like I do have the brine left over, so if after I get all the solids out, it does still look too thick, I can always fix that. Basically in batches, I am going to start pouring this in, and then with a spatula that I have already sanitized, I am going to start kind of sieving the solids from the liquids here. This is part of why I love doing this, is because in one kind of batch, you get 3 byproducts, right? So we get this brine, you get the sauce. Do not throw this pulp away either. I'm gonna spread this out thin on a baking sheet, and I have an air fryer back there that has a dehydration setting. I'm gonna let this go for about 4 hours at maybe like 170 or something like that. And then I have a really cool kind of version of chili flakes. So at this point, we have our sauce. All in all, it looks pretty good. It is definitely thick. I may end up adding just a splash more of the brine because I don't want this to thicken up too much as it cools. Ooh. Okay, yeah. I do think she could use a little bit more sweetness. So I'm gonna re-sanitize this. I'm gonna add maybe another like 2 tablespoons of this honey. A lot better. She's hot. All right. Sorry, let me go back to it together.
He needs some milk.
The last thing that I want to talk about before we actually throw this stuff into bottles is pasteurization. It kills all of the potential bacteria in there. If I wanted to pasteurize this, I would throw it in a saucepan and I would basically heat it up, I believe to 180 degrees, let it simmer, and then we can bottle it. The fermentation will have stopped because the bacteria is dead. And at that point, it is fully shelf stable. So you can leave it stored at room temperature, but the whole point of the fermentation is that bacteria, kind of the same way that kombucha is alive and really gut healthy, so is this hot sauce. If you don't pasteurize it, you do have to leave it in the fridge, because if you leave it at room temperature, it's gonna keep fermenting in the bottle. It'll give off gas, and you'll basically be left with a bottle bomb. Fermentation will continue a lot slower in the fridge, but as that happens, like I said before, the flavor of the sauce will actually change. I'm gonna opt to leave these all unpasteurized. They are still perfectly safe for consumption. We're just gonna go ahead and write to bottle. I'm actually gonna move the sauce to a container that has a lip, just because pouring from this into my funnel is gonna be a lot easier and less messy. What that leaves us with is 7.5, roughly, bottles of sauce, which is great yield. I'm usually left with more than an exact number of bottles. And this is the one that I use first. I kind of use that as a taster so that I can keep an eye on where the sauce is at without having to open up one of these that I could gift to a friend. So I'm just gonna throw
Hello?
these things into each of these, throw a lid on. You can use a hair dryer to attach one of these sealers onto it. And then basically we just gotta label them and throw them in the fridge and they are good to go. I'm also going to get set up for the next sauce that I'm gonna do. You just wanna make sure that you're rinsing and then re-sanitizing everything that you used for the first batch. So now we're gonna go ahead and get started with one of the mash fermentations. Same exact thing here. We're gonna pop this guy open. All good things. I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna add some guava juice, and I'm also gonna add some extra hibiscus leaves to it. Right now, this is kind of a Pepto-Bismol pink. I wanna see if I can try to get it to like a deeper, like actual hibiscus color. Add this in here. Throw our hibiscus leaves in. One thing I want to call out when you're doing additives like this, you want to try your best to find something that doesn't have many or any preservatives in it, just because preservatives are going to inhibit the bacteria, which is what we want to encourage in here. So I'm going to add some of this in here. So I added about a half a cup, and same exact thing as with the other one. I'm going to put this in here. Oh, and I almost forgot the xanthan gum. So we'll throw this in here. And now we're gonna let this go for like 90 seconds. Okay, the guava comes through. There's a little bit of a hibiscus. And then the habanero is a really, really light, slow burn. I didn't add too many of them, and I also seeded them beforehand because I didn't want this to be absolute napalm. Nice and refreshing. I'm pleasantly surprised with this. That is number 2 in the books. You can see exactly what I mean when I say that mash allows for a higher yield. The last one I think gave me almost 8 bottles. This gave me almost 13 with the same gallon-sized fermentation vessel. I have 4 more to go through. I'll be sure to make a follow-up post once all 6 of them are finished. But yeah, let me know if you like this. And thank you so much for watching.